Welcome back to Definitely Not Definitive. I'm Ken.
And I'm Bethany.
And we're just a couple of kooky, crazy kids in love that love celebrating with the community.
We do.
And so we asked our patrons to vote on a video for us to celebrate with. And of course, they picked the most violent one. Worst punishments in the history of mankind by the Infographics show. So every time we passed a milestone, every 5,000 subscribers, we like to celebrate with the community. And thank you for everything that you do for this channel. So 35,000, we passed it.
Woohoo!
So now we're gonna celebrate. And yeah.
And I'm really glad that I will have alcohol with the video that I won. Because I've not like taken a dive into the punishment chapter of history per se, but from some stories I've heard, they are pretty awful.
Yeah. People have been coming up with messed up punishments for quite a while. All right, here we go.
Here you go. Hey,
Hey, cheers!
Woo!
Oh, Jesus.
Woo!
Cheers, everybody. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you so much.
Okay, here we go.
Oh boy.
French philosopher Michel Foucault starts his book Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison with a chapter about an unfortunate Frenchman named Robert Francois Damiens. Damiens had tried and failed to assassinate King Louis XV, and for it, he was severely punished.
Rookie mistake.
He was burned with molten wax and lead and had boiling oil poured into his open wounds.
Oh,
he was then quartered by horses pulling at his limbs, and then his torso was burned at the stake. Some of the crowd cheered, but one commentator wrote, "I was several times obliged to turn away my face and to stop my ears as I heard his piercing shrieks,
Oh, God,
half
I
of his
imagine.
body having been torn from him." Things slowly changed regarding the harshness of punishments, but today we'll look back at the brutal past. In this episode of the Infographic Show, the worst punishments in the history of mankind. We should explain that this list is in no particular order of nastiness, because you'll see that all these punishments meted out are barbaric to the nth degree. It would be hard to say which is the worst, as they are all incredibly horrific. We'll let you decide which punishment you think is the most heinous.
Okay.
We will
Yeah,
also
I do.
add that some of you might believe that prolonged agony, such as solitary confinement for 20 years, might actually be worse than excruciating pain that lasts a few seconds or minutes before death. But we'll focus more on barbaric acts
Instead of
today.
psychological.
The rack. We'll start with one punishment you have all probably heard of.
Yeah.
The rack was a fairly simple device consisting of a rectangular frame and a series of levers, pulleys, and ropes. There are different versions of the rack dating from antiquity to Middle Ages Europe. The idea was to stretch the prisoner by the joints until the muscles were torn and the joints popped. Eventually, all the joints would be dislocated. Hanged, drawn, and quartered. This is close to what happened to Damiens, but was better known as a very gruesome form of execution in Middle Ages England when someone had committed high treason, aka treason against the
William
state.
Wallace.
The prisoner would be hanged until almost dead, then he would be taken down and disemboweled while still alive, and also have his manhood cut from his body. He would then be chopped into pieces, and often his head was chopped off and hung someplace where the public could
Looks
see
like
it.
a cake
The punishment
almost.
was
Vomit.
abolished in England in 1870. Judas chair, also known as Danny's chair or Judas cradle. It's not known exactly when this was used, but there are sketches of it in existence, and it also is on display in some museums. This gruesome device was a
thanks.
chair with a sharp pointed pyramid shape on the seat of the chair. Websites writing about medieval history tell us people would be sat atop this spike and lowered by ropes, which was extremely painful as it entered the orifice.
Yeah.
But sometimes they would be dragged down on it with the use of weights, while application of oil would make things worse.
Oh my God.
They would die slowly as they were further lowered, or perhaps die even more slowly from infection. This could take hours or days, according to two sources we found. Some
Days.
sources say it was used during the Spanish Inquisition, but other sources refute that. Boiling. Again, we turn to England, and this time to the 1500s.
Henry
It's said
VIII?
the often irascible King Henry VIII made this a form of capital punishment, but it seems to also have been popular at some point in time all around Europe and Asia. As you can guess, the torture and usually the eventual death was a result of someone being boiled alive in a large cauldron or kettle full of water, oil, or tar. The Catherine wheel. Also known as the breaking
Catherine
wheel,
wheel.
it's thought this simple method of bodily destruction was used mainly in the 18th and 19th centuries in Europe and parts of Asia. The French writer Voltaire writes about the punishment in a book published in the 18th century. Prisoners were tied and splayed on a large wooden wheel. The executioner would then take a heavy object, sometimes an iron cudgel, and break the person on the wheel until the body was completely almost in pieces. Sometimes,
be the
however,
person
it
to
would
do
take
that.
a few
Ugh.
days for the victims to die from their injuries. The head crusher. This should be self-explanatory. Imagine a metal dish strapped to your skull and a metal plate under your chin. You can't move as it is all secured. The dish can be lowered using a large screw that can be turned. As it lowers, it breaks the bones in your head and eventually crushes the skull.
Oh my
We
god.
can't find too many reliable sources telling us when this was used, but again, it's thought it was a contraption of the Middle Ages. History.com tells us it was a real thing, and it appears in a book called The Big Book of Pain, Torture, and Punishment Through History.
Middle Ages were so
If you've
brutal.
seen Game of Thrones, you'll be familiar
Medieval
with this
on your ass.
punishment. The torture comprises of cutting off all of a person's skin, although it's said in China sometimes it was just the facial skin. Sometimes the person may have been burned first to make the cutting easier, or just perhaps to add more nastiness. It was around as late as the 18th century, and Michel Foucault discusses it in gory detail in the book we mentioned, Discipline and Punish. It's said the English did it to thieves in the 13th century, but such punishment happened all over the world throughout the ages. It's said that the Chinese Emperor Hongwu ordered the flaying of 5,000 women in
What?
1357, although a book called Skin and Bones puts the date at 1396.
Why?
Death by 1,000 cuts. Sticking with China and a similar period comes this brutal torture. Also known as lingqi, a book called Death by 1,000 Cuts says it was a common form of punishment in China in the 14th century, but was around in the country for many centuries. The prisoner's entire body would be sliced, but it would take a long time to die, as you would expect from small slices. But nothing was spared from the knife, and eventually this would kill the unfortunate victim. However, while this
that
form
would
of
suck.
punishment became infamous outside of China, some historians tell us that it wasn't as prolonged as some people originally said, and that some of those cuts actually meant dismemberment, making death arrive faster. Sawing. Looking at sketches of this
No!
from the 15th century, it is in
Don't
some
know.
ways the most barbaric, as it's so basic. A person is hanged
So
upside down
basic.
from some gallows with their legs forming a V shape. Two men would then take a large saw and cut the man in half from his groin area. He would
my
apparently live through much of this.
Like I was like, sawing's the
According to
basic
one source we
bitch
can
of torture.
find, this was only infrequently used in medieval Europe and in China, where sawing horizontally through the middle was an alternative. Looking around the web, sawing took all kinds of forms all over the world during many centuries. In any case, people were sawed apart, but the method may have taken many forms. Rats. You might be thinking right now, what on
yeah.
earth was wrong with people in the past that enacted or even endorsed such behavior? Because humans understand pain so well, were we not blessed with a built-in morality? If you haven't already thought that, perhaps you will in a second, as death by rats really takes the biscuit. It was apparently used in medieval Europe and China. Some sources tell us that starved rats are poured into a box with a naked prisoner, and they slowly eat the person. Other
Ugh.
sources say the belly of the person is first partially opened so the rats can get at the insides. It's written about in a 1931 book called Merrily I Go to Hell, Reminiscences of a Bishop's Daughter.
They also did that in
Another
Game of
book
Thrones.
called The Dictionary of Torture tells us that this happened in Germany. Yet another book tells us that in China, the rat would be trapped on a victim's stomach under a metal pot. This pot would be heated until the rat had no other choice than to try and gnaw its way through the person's body. We can't say what the outcome of this would be, and perhaps it's not so plausible that a rat could eat its way through a body. Some of the sources that say that was the case don't offer evidence of it happening that way. So, there's a short history of some human barbarity. Let's be glad we have evolved somewhat since those times. Can you think of a heinous punishment that we didn't mention here? Let us know in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other video called Worst Prison Experiments Conducted on Humans. Thanks for watching.
Oh wow, that was yeah. I mean, I think the one in the thumbnails is the worst one. The sawing, it being hung like that and just starting right from no.
I don't know. The Judas chair taking several days potentially of
Ooh,
just slow
yeah.
agony all that time.
That was pretty bad.
I mean, like, I was looking at some of them and I was like, okay, well, at least hopefully, you know, you'll die somewhat quickly. Like,
Mhm.
you know, if they're sawing through you, yeah, they said you'll be way through most of that process, but I also have to imagine that, like, they're gonna hit some arteries. Like, there are arteries that run through
yeah.
their legs and stuff. I'm like, I'm hoping, I'm hoping that they nick something and that you bleed out rather fast.
Yeah, the Judas chair. Like as soon as you saw it, I was like, okay, I know where this is going, and I don't like it.
Yeah. And then I think just because I've been somebody who's had dislocations, the rack has always been something that's given me chills just because, yeah. Although the first guy who was like ripped apart for trying to kill King Louis,
Oh yeah.
that might be the worst.
Yeah, he got it pretty bad. Like, and then there was like oil like was put into his like open wounds and
Open
everything.
wounds,
and
yeah. Boiling oil.
Yeah,
Or like,
yeah. That would not be a good way to go either. All horrific. That's why when people talk about like the violence in video games and whatnot and how it's corrupting people's minds and stuff. It's almost like, did you like this? People have had fucked up imaginations for how to like be cruel and vicious and just like violent long before video games were around.
Well, and when you go back to even ancient times, pain and punishment were a form of entertainment.
Yeah.
In the Middle Ages, they still sort of were, but they were also an example like, hey, don't mess with the king because, this could happen. I think we had evolved somewhat, not enough by any means, but like we'd come a little bit of a ways from the Colosseum when voting on people's death and demise and enjoying them getting ripped apart by lions or other gladiators was considered a fun way to spend your weekend.
That's true. So happy 35,000. Yay! But I mean, it's been a while since we had something that, Bethany had to look away from a couple times. So.
And I mean, I do like that. I do like history. So it was, cringeworthy while also giving me history, I guess.
Yeah, see? Everybody wins, all right? And that's what we like. So thanks so much for checking out our reaction for Worst Punishments in the History of Mankind by the Infographics Show. But just keep in mind
that our reaction is definitely not definitive. And thanks, everyone.
Thanks.